Thank you for the click. My name is Luxley. I am the elementary school dropout who went on to play Elemental Shaman. We are knocking Ele Shaman off the list here today. Now keep in mind, this is not in any shape or form a guide. This is more or less just a first impression video or review to give people a very, very good idea where Ele Shaman stand, and we're breaking things down and evaluating them on 6 different categories. 1, single target damage. 2, AOE damage. 3, crowd control. 4, survivability, which is a mix of both your defenses and your healing. 5 is mobility, and last but not least, we're going to talk about something called utility. Yes, utility. Now, when I talk about utility, I'm not talking about your single target damage, your AOE damage. I'm talking about what is it that you bring to the table, that you bring to a group, that it makes you unique, that makes you in demand, that puts you in demand, where a group says we have to get ourselves an Elemental Shaman. Keep in mind, right here and now in the beta, as well as the pre-patch, the launch, a few months into BFA, we can very much expect a lot of changes and tweaks and turns, nerfs and buffs to both single target and AOE damage. The rest of the categories, they generally don't change that much, so we have a very good foundation, a very, very good idea where they stand here and now. Now, the way I'm grading things, also, I want to point out that I'm going to be heavily weighing in on 2 factors. 1, is each particular category improved from Legion? And 2, how does each particular category for Elemental Shaman compare with other DPS classes? Single target damage. Shocks return in BFA, Frost, Earth, and Flame. Lava Burst and Lightning Bolt round out the rest of your baseline single target abilities, returning in BFA as well. Now your mastery, Elemental Overload, Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, Lava Burst, and 2 talents, Ice Fury and Elemental Blast, have a chance to trigger a second cast for 85% damage. In Legion it was 95% damage, and generate Maelstrom. Stormkeeper, your on-use artifact ability moves over to the challenge tree and happens to be weak sauce. Very weak sauce. Not even worth a look or a shot, to be honest, in its current build. There is no 200% damage increase, and 3 significant artifact traits: Static Overlord, Fury of Storms, and Power of the Maelstrom no longer affect Stormkeeper. Static Overlord, after using Stormkeeper, your next Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning causes Elemental Overload. Although, I must point out, there will be some other chances to cause Elemental Overlord, so this isn't that big of a loss, but the other 2 are. Fury of Storms, activating Stormkeeper summons an elemental to fight with you. It was kind of cool to have someone in the trenches with you fighting. It was a great animation and did a fair amount of damage. Well, it is definitely gone. And Power of the Maelstrom, when you cast Lava Burst, you have a chance to cause your next 3 Lightning Bolts to trigger Elemental Overlord an additional time. That's pretty huge. Now, to make Stormkeeper, I think, a more relevant choice, it needs to be instant, or provide some increase for Elemental Overlord, or damage, modest damage buff, or even just lower the cooldown. That would make it, cut the cooldown in half, would make it something a little bit more worth it. Resurrected from the Elemental Graveyard, the passive ability Fulmination returns in BFA in name only. Fulmination was a real hard-hitting ability. It would build up damage, and then all of a sudden you'd have a Fulmination, and then you could use Earth Shock on a target for some really big damage. This rendition of Fulmination is completely different. Lava Burst, Lightning Bolt, and Chain Lightning also generate some extra Maelstrom. New single target talents include Exposed Elements, Master of Elements, Unlimited Power, and High Voltage. Let's get into the details here. Exposed Elements. Earthshock gives your next Lightning Bolt 100% increased damage. Master of Elements. Lightning Bolt increases your nature and frost damage by 20%. That should certainly add some juice to Ice Fury. Unlimited Power. Elemental Overload increases haste by 2% for 10 seconds. Doesn't really impress me. It does stack, but the most you're going to stack it is 6, maybe 8%. And High Voltage, Lightning Bolt, and Chain Lightning can trigger a second Elemental Overload. So there's a lot of stress on triggering more and more Elemental Overloads. One key talent goes by the wayside: Elemental Mastery. 20% haste for 20 seconds, which happens to be a pretty huge loss. 3 key talents have undergone tweaks or changes: Aftershock, Stormkeeper, and Ice Fury. Aftershock refunds 25% Maelstrom rather than 30% Maelstrom. Not a big deal, but I want to be thorough. Storm Elemental reduces the cast time of Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning by 3%, stacks 20 times, but no longer generates Maelstrom. So that's a pretty huge decrease, potentially, in your cast time there, because it lasts 20 seconds, 3% stacking. That's huge. Ice Fury, the breakdown of damage and Maelstrom generated is very significant in Legion, 400% damage increase. In BFA, 60%. 24 Maelstrom generated in Legion, 16 in BFA. It's a huge nerf, but to be honest, it still hits pretty hard. So the numbers don't look like they work in your favor, but the feel of it is still pretty impactful. Even though Elemental lost quite a bit of juice with the loss of the artifact ability and all of the other traits that were attributed to it, a lot of stripped down, very much nerfed, Elemental's still pretty good, despite all that. A lot of the lost damage is baked into your baseline spells in BFA. The rotation is highly proc dependent and a bit clunky, but I still have to give Elemental single target damage a solid 4. AOE damage. Throughout Elemental's tenure in WoW, since Vanilla for the Horde and BC for the Alliance, the AOE has been, on a whole, pretty good. And BFA is no exception, in spite of losing a few key AOE traits and talents. No matter what Blizzard does, and this has been an ongoing thing, ever since they first introduced Earthquake in the game, they just can't seem to make Earthquake a viable function for AOE. It's always second best to Chain Lightning, and losing the artifact trait, Seismic Storm, Earthquake damage has a 5% chance to cause seismic lightning and deal nature damage. It really doesn't hurt that much, but once again, it just kind of shows that Blizzard's just having a tough time making what is a pretty cool ability pretty darn viable. Now, there is some AoE synergy with the Talent Master of Elements, and I covered that a little bit in the earlier segment. I'm going to go over it again. Lightning Bolt increases your next Frost or Nature spell by 20%. So the idea of casting Lightning Bolt, then Chain Lightning will give you or give your AoE some extra juice. And the talent High Voltage, Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning can trigger a second Elemental Overload. Should be pretty huge. Combo those two talents together, and it really does start to help fill the missing gap or really start to fill in a lot of punch to your AoE. In a talent tree, Path of Flame, 10% damage increase to Lava Burst, and it also spreads Flame Shock to nearby targets, is a very huge loss. Make no mistake about it. However, I do believe there will be some kind of passive ability with the Azerite armor that will fill the gap here. I haven't really talked much about the Azerite armor because it's still an ongoing process, or at least when I first started these first impression videos, it was in a very incomplete process. But now it's starting to come into fruition, and we hopefully will get into that in some separate videos. Elemental AoE is not as good as it was in Legion, and somewhere in the middle of the pack towards the top when compared with other specializations. But the fact is, there's been a tapering down, there's been a watering down, a dilution of AoE damage throughout the entire new X-Pack for every single class. So this is par for the course. But overall, I give Elemental AoE a 3.5. Crowd Control. The Elemental Shaman Hallmark CC ability Hex returns in BFA. Other baseline CC include 2 ranged snares, Earthbind Totem, and Frost Shock. You lose the talent Earth Grab Totem that roots enemies, something highly effective in PvP against melee, perhaps the only thing effective against melee, and Voodoo Totem, essentially an AoE Hex, is no longer an option. Voodoo Totem also happened to be a very creative and interesting idea, but not really that effective due to the range and proximity limitations. Plus, players didn't feel comfortable giving up a very reliable CC in Hex. The good news is Capacitor Totem, essentially a delayed AoE stun for 3 seconds, 1 minute cooldown, is now a baseline ability. The new talent Static Charge reduces the remaining CC on Capacitor Totem by 5 seconds for each stun target up to 20-second max. So pretty huge combo right there. And of course, how can I leave out Thunderstorm, the reigning king of all knockbacks? The PvP talent Traveling Storms puts a 40-yard range on Thunderstorm and makes it castable on allies to increase the fun. That gives you more of a preemptive strike ability, more so than any kind of a reactionary one, which is something that is huge in PvP. In Legion, both Traveling Storms and Lightning Lasso happen to be on the same tier, therefore limiting your choices. In BFA, you can choose both abilities. Lightning Lasso is channeled stun, dealing a decent amount of damage, 20-yard range, 30-second cooldown. So some interesting options now in PvP because you can have both those talents. In Legion, you couldn't. The CC doesn't really look or sound that bad as I'm making it out to be, but from a PvP perspective, the idea of losing mobility, which I'm going to cover in a few minutes, and losing Earth Grab Totem is really borderline catastrophic here. Snares, and I'm going to say this 100 times, I'll spare you the details and say it once very slowly. Snares do not stop or slow melee. Roots do. In a previous X-Pack, snares work their magic. But not anymore. Snares work a lot better against casters than they do for casters. Elemental Shaman are now like Shadow Priest. If you're snared, you're basically dead unless some kind of divine intervention occurs. Losing Earth Grab Totem hurts a hell of a lot, and it hurts even more since your mobility is significantly gimped in BFA. But still, you can now choose both Traveling Storms and Lightning Lasso, giving you some flexibility and quite a bit of preemptive strike ability. So that means that there's going to be a bit of a learning curve, a bit of a skill curve to get over there. Overall, I give Elemental CC a 2.5. Survivability. Healing Surge and Astral Shift return to BFA copy and paste. As a result of mobility getting nerfed, survivability does improve a little bit. 3 talents enhance your survivability: Spirit Wolf, Earth Shield, and Nature's Guardian. Nothing inventive or creative here, but we do see a very useful Resto Shaman ability find a new home in the Elemental talent tree. Spirit Wolf, every 1 second you gain 5% movement speed and 5% damage reduction when you enter Ghost Wolf, stacks 4 times. Very useful when there are dots on you, but not as useful in PvP for improved mobility, not as useful as you might think. And the reason for this is there's a huge chance you'll be snared and not gain the full effect. And Elemental Shaman, like most casters, don't have a way to remove snares, which is ridiculous. As far as PvE is concerned, it's an incredible talent and very useful because as you're getting out of harm's way, you're gaining more speed and a little bit of damage protection or reduction at the same time. This is really, really huge. Once again, Earth Shield increases healing by 10% and heals you when you take damage. Once again, huge against dots, but can't be stacked with Spirit Wolf, unfortunately, because they're both on the same tier. And Earth Shield can be used on friendly targets, so there's quite a bit of utility there. You can kind of protect your friends. That's a cool thing. Or you don't have to protect your friends. It's up to you. The third new talent happens to provide the same function as an old artifact trait. Nature's Guardian triggers 20% maximum health heal when you drop below 35% health. And of course, the returning talent, Ancestral Guidance, for the next 10 seconds, 25% of your damage and healing is converted into healing on up to 3 nearby allies. Huge for raids, pretty good in PvP as well. 2-minute cooldown. The cooldown should be a little bit lower. I like the flexibility of this kind of talent because you can maintain offensive pressure and heal at the same time, which is something most melee classes can do, and it's really cool that a caster can do it as well here. Elemental Shaman did lose the passive ability Elemental Focus. Direct damage crits increase your healing or damage of your next 2 spells by 10%. This is more of a DPS loss than a healing loss because if you take Earth Shield, you're going to receive 10% increased healing on a regular basis, plus whatever damage you take, you're going to get healed for. So Earth Shield is definitely a better choice than, say, Elemental Focus, but as I said, you lose the damage. That's where it does hurt. I got to break this down into 2 perspectives, PvP and PvE. From a PvE perspective, your survivability is pretty darn good, and there will be no complaints to put the complaint department on overtime. You're not going to be looking on the forums to complain about survivability from a PvE perspective. Not the same story from a PvP perspective, however. And this is largely a result of the reduced mobility, which, okay, I'm going to cover in the next section. Survivability PvE a 4, PvP a 3. Mobility. Yes, you do possess Ghost Wolf, and you can take the talent Spirit Wolf to increase your speed by 20%. Plus, there is the PvP talent Spectral Recovery, providing a HOT as well as an additional 10% movement speed. All sounds pretty good, right? 20% damage reduction, 20% speed, plus 10%. I mean, the numbers really start to add in your favor with these two talents stacked in PvP. But there is no snare removal, which is ridiculous. And a Gust of Wind is no longer a talent, which is even more ridiculous. As a caster in PvP, a speed boost is pretty much useless unless your spellcasts are 100% instant, and they're not. Snares don't stop melee. I can't say it enough. They're useless against melee. Only roots stop them, and you lost your Earth Grab Totem. Here's the problem for all non-mage casters, maybe even save boomkins. If you can't change your position in the blink of an eye, you are going to die. Yes, that rhymes, but there is no reason other than the dumbass class fantasy argument to lose Gust of Wind. You have to be able to change your position. Yes, you can kite some melee effectively. No doubt about that. The problem occurs with Windwalker monks and demon hunters who you cannot kite, and therefore they maintain absolutely insane uptime on a target. Now, fortunately, we don't see a lot of Windwalker monks out there, but we do see a hell of a lot of demon hunters out there. Can you handle a Windwalker monk or a demon hunter 1v1? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Honestly, it's almost a fair fight. But here's how the problem starts to gain some momentum and starts to become a big problem. When a demon hunter or a Windwalker monk nail you down, it gives other melee a chance to catch up and to focus down you as a target. This occurs more in BGs than Arena, but it certainly does occur in Arena as well. This puts casters in a 1v2 or a 1v3, and it's an ongoing issue Blizzard absolutely refuses to address, because class fantasy. And it doesn't matter how many speed boosts you add to the equation, they are useless when you are snared. Speaking of speed boost, Wind Rush Totem does provide a 60% speed boost to all allies who pass within 10 yards. Great for mobility in PvE, absolutely tremendous, but pretty much useless in PvP. Which leads me to another breakdown of PvP and PvE as far as mobility is concerned. In PvE, it really doesn't matter what choice you make on tier 75. You're adding value to a group, you're adding a speed boost to a group. There isn't a bad choice on the tier for you, and I give your mobility a solid 4. From a PvP perspective, losing Gust of Wind is a fucking disaster. Your mobility is a 1.5. The fix for the PvP side is pretty simple and easy, without going crazy and drastically changing things. Add a PvP talent where Ghost Wolf gains a 25 to 30 second cooldown, but gives a snare removal along with a little bit more of a speed boost. Or you can add some useful utility to water walking and have it be a snare removal on a cooldown as well. Just a little creative thinking. Utility. Elemental utility has always been strong and continues to be strong in BFA. An old friend returns into the fold, Tremor Totem. Tremor Totem returns from the recycle bin as a new baseline spell. Removes fear, charm, and sleep effects for 10 seconds, 1 minute cooldown. Purge your offensive dispel and cleanse your curse removal, which is going to have a lot more use in BFA and PvP. Both of them return along with heroism and water walking. One of the more underrated passive abilities, Reincarnation, allows you a self-res with 20% health and mana, 30-minute cooldown. For PvE, it's what I would call your friendly and trusty get-out-of-jail card to get you back into the fight, and to a lesser extent, the talent Nature's Guardian also keeps you in the fight. I covered that in the previous section. On the PvP side of the game, in the talents, you have a very useful ability in Counter-Strike Totem. On a reasonable 45-second cooldown, direct damage within 20 yards of the totem deal 100% of the damage back to the attacker lasts 15 seconds. So that's a 33% uptime. That's pretty huge. I could put this in the survivability category, but I put it here because you can pass the protection onto your healer or another party member. Another useful PvP talent providing utility, Grounding Totem, redirects all harmful spells cast on a nearby party member to itself. Lasts 3 seconds, 30-second cooldown. I put this in the utility section for the same reason I put the Counter-Strike Totem in the utility section. It could be used on party members. Anything that you could use on party members adds to the team, adds value to the team, therefore creates a little bit of utility. Even a fun ability like Farsight gives you a little bit of extra utility, especially in PvP. Overall, I give utility a solid 4. Your single target damage, AOE damage, both pretty good, something to be happy about. Your mobility, horrible in PvP, good enough in PvE. And your survivability, slightly improved, but still less than compared to other classes. And utility, very, very strong. It's the mobility part that really gets me, and losing that gust of wind is huge in PvP. Anyway, this is Luxley saying, whatever it is by you, whether it's morning, afternoon, or night, make it epic.